Call the meeting to order. Today is Wednesday, January 7th at 1:10. And we're going to do a workshop today on financial matters. Madam Secretary, will you call the roll?
Commissioner Erdman.
Here.
Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Commissioner Slade.
Here.
Commissioner Baker. Here. Commissioner Tucker and vote right just step away from me.
Okay, well, welcome to everyone in the room and to those joining us via the internet. I have a friendly reminder for all that we are live streaming our open meeting for public view. If you're speaking, please make sure you speak into the microphone and that the microphone is turned on so that listeners might hear what you're saying. We're going to start the meeting this afternoon with a brief safety report. Becky Almaroth, Chief Safety and Operations Officer, is going to share with us what we should do in case of an emergency.
I
Becky?
appreciate it. Good afternoon. Very important for those in the room, a little bit of an unfamiliar situation, just being in a conference room. If we had in the event of emergency where we need to evacuate this room, if there's a fire, any kind of other emergency, everybody in the audience will utilize the back door, kind of curve around and go out past the dock. We're going to meet up on High Street. So go up the hill onto High Street into that grassy area. Take a look at who's next to you right now to make sure that everybody around you, your friends, make it out. Everybody that's on the platform, you'll go out this back door and exit, same direction, head up the street so that we can regroup and make sure everybody makes it out okay. In the event of a medical emergency, we have Taylor is going to call 911 since she's great at communicating the information over the phone. Greg Boland, we are not allowing him to touch the fire extinguisher. Scott will grab that. Greg agreed to grab the AED in case that is needed. In case any CPR needs to be performed on anybody, usually when I volunteer, that keeps everybody healthy, but Mark Broken and myself will do that. And then Tom gave me a good reminder. I think he was joking a little bit that everybody this time of year, we are dealing with a lot of things that cause stress in our lives, and everybody's doing life. And we've had quite a bit of our staff recently that's gone through mental health first aid training. So most of us now are very equipped to have conversations that can really help our employees when they're in a crisis situation. So great reminder, Tom. I appreciate that. He's freshly trained, which is I need somebody to talk to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Becky. Okay, today we're going to have a workshop, a financial forecast update from our Chief Financial Officer, Brenda Morris, and our Financial Services Director, Doug Hood. I'm going to ask Brenda to come forward and bring her presentation forward at this time. Are you ready to go?
We are.
Okay.
Director Hassinger, do you have any comments before we get started? Well, good afternoon, Chairman, Commissioners, and Director Hassinger. Today I'll be discussing the first step in our process for developing our spending plans, and that is our financial forecast. We will be speaking from attachment 1 and 2 in your materials. So if you want to follow along, you can look at those. The financial forecast is used to determine how much funding can be allocated through the STIP process and is used to develop the appropriations request. The forecast is updated annually for a 5-year rolling time period. The forecast I'm discussing today is for road and bridge only and is for the time period 2027 through 2031. It is an estimate at a point in time. The real focus is on years 1 and 2, and it is more accurate in the earlier years. The later years, the further out we go, the more uncertainty exists. We do use a variety of information to determine those estimates, and I will mention that as we go through. You will formally approve the forecast as part of approving the STIP and when you approve the budget request. So there will be no action today, and there will be no action at tomorrow's meeting when I do a presentation. This forecast, like the ones in the last couple of years, has some unique items. We will talk about the base forecasting for state revenues, federal revenues, and regular spending. And then there will be several items that are significant one-time sources of funding for very specific purposes that we will talk about. The lowest cash balance in the state road fund is in year 2032. at $687.5 million. Remember that the forecast is at a point in time, and revenues and expenditures fluctuate throughout the year. We do try to maintain a cash balance of at least $250 million for those cash flow purposes. The ending balance is higher due to the issuance of bonds in 2032, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in this presentation. We used to be required to keep some cash balance for bonding, but with paying off the senior lien bonds in 2023, that requirement is no longer needed. For revenues, we start with the fiscal year 25 actuals and then make adjustments from there in most cases. Operating expenditures, we start with the fiscal year 26 budget and then adjust for things like the new decision items that are part of the appropriations request that the legislature will take up. The cash balances of the State Road Fund, the State Highways Transportation Department Fund, and the State Road Bond Fund at June 30, 2025 was a little over $1.5 billion. This cash balance would include any savings or overruns we've experienced in previous years. And the current cash balance as of December 31st was $1.6 billion, and again includes those three funds. We're going to talk about each of the three primary state revenue sources. On each of these graphs, we're going to show you the actual revenues from 2013 to 2025, and then compare the forecast we're presenting today to the forecast that were from last year. The blue line is the actuals, the red line is last year's forecast, and the green line is this year's forecast. For motor fuel tax, staff and I had quite a bit of discussion about this one. For motor fuel taxes, and we're going to exclude the Senate Bill 262 revenues for right now, fiscal year 2025 actuals were $6.4 million less than what we projected. So we ended the year last year below what we projected. The declines came later in the year, just about the time that we had the interruptions in the markets. There was lots of discussions about tariffs. And you can see in the graph that motor fuel taxes have had quite a bit of variation since fiscal year 2020. In the first 6 months of fiscal year 2026, however, we have seen motor fuel taxes coming in higher than projections by $1.2 million. For the first 5 months, it was higher by $6 million. So in December, we saw a decline. After much discussion, moving forward, we still believe vehicles with greater fuel economy and ones powered by alternative fuels are going to offset any increases in vehicle miles traveled. And this forecast includes an annual decline of a negative 0.2% for 2026 and beyond, which is the same assumption that we made last year. Senate Bill 262 passed by the General Assembly in fiscal year 2021 and signed into law by the governor in July of 2021 increases the motor fuel tax by 12.5 cents over 5 years, with 2.5 cents being increased per year. The last increase occurred July 1st of 2025. This graph shows the projections related to Senate Bill 262 motor fuel taxes. Similar assumptions were made for this revenue source as the rest of motor fuel tax. This slide shows that the revenue is net of refunds and the constitutional distributions to cities and counties. And as you can see from the line, there is really very little difference from 1 year to the next. But we want to talk a little bit more about the assumptions made for refunds. Actual refunds have ranged from a low of 0.37% to a high of 0.77%. The last 2 years, actual refunds have been right at 0.5%. So that is the assumption we've used in this forecast, and that is the same as last year. The overall impact of Senate Bill 262 fuel tax is $11 million less projected this year compared to last year's forecast, and that's primarily because the gallons sold in fiscal year 2025 which is the starting point we used, was less. For motor vehicle sales tax, fiscal year 2025 actuals were 9.9 million or 2.1% more than projected. And while we've seen some decline in fiscal year 2026, primarily in the first month and then again in December, we believe people will continue to purchase vehicles. And for this forecast, we started with the fiscal year 2025 actuals and grew them 3% for fiscal year 2026 and beyond. This is the same assumption as last year. And as you can see in the graph, last year's forecast and this year's forecast having a similar trajectory. The overall impact is 56.6 million more in this forecast compared to last year's forecast. This is another one. This is motor vehicle and driver's license fees, and staff and I have had lots of discussions about the information shown in this chart. As you can see in the chart, this category has been pretty volatile. Janelle and I plan to meet and do a deeper dive into the data behind this information and to ask some questions, but we'll tell you what we are assuming today. This graph shows motor vehicle and driver's license fees were 4.9 million less than what was projected in 2025. For the first 5 months of fiscal year 2026, this revenue source is continuing to come in below our projections. For this year's forecast, we started with an average 4-year of actual, so it is a little bit different than what we typically do. That amount is 319.6 million. We are projecting a 1% growth rate for fiscal year 2026 and beyond, which is less than the 1.5% used last year. The overall impact is 72.5 million less in this forecast than last year's forecast. In this graph, we compare how state revenue projections for all state revenue in this forecast compares to those from last year's forecast. The red line represents last year's forecast and the blue line is this year's forecast. In addition to the 3 primary revenue sources that we discussed in detail, this chart also includes the interest we earn on our monies deposited with the state treasurer and miscellaneous revenue. And miscellaneous revenue includes proceeds from the sale of excess property or equipment, as well as reimbursement from entities that we do joint projects with. For example, MoDOT's cost share program. Of these revenue sources, we are earning more interest in this forecast than last year's forecast. And so in total, the difference between the 2 lines is 3.4 million less. So very, very close to what we estimated last year. Federal revenue includes the federal funds, our construction projects, for our construction projects, as well as the federal funds we receive for preventive maintenance, design work, construction engineering, statewide planning and research reimbursements, and the federal funds that we pass on to local entities. Again, we're showing a comparison between this year's forecast and last year's forecast. That comparison shows the timing of federal funding changes a little bit, and overall this year's forecast contains 38.9 million more federal funds than last year's forecast, and it's just because of timing.
While we're on that point, I note that the authority for the federal government to spend money will expire at the end of the month, and we could be once again in a shutdown. Would that have any impact on our receipt and banking of federal funds, or do we have most of those?
It does not impact our federal funds. We have separate authorizations for our federal funds, and so the government shutdown does not impact us.
One less thing to worry about.
That is correct.
Thank you.
But it is something that we worry about on the delivery side. So the funding side, minimal impact. But when federal government agencies shut down, even though federal highway is funded, many of the others we depend on to get approval for environmental things like that. So it's not that we'd have no concerns. It's just we don't worry about the funding side. And the longer those go on, the more problematic it gets. So let's hope we don't get there.
Ironically, today, that's more a function of the state legislature in terms of authorizing the release of federal funds.
This forecast does have several debt issuances planned. Keep in mind that each issuance will be considered individually and will only be done if the situation warrants. First of all, for I-70 in fiscal year 26, we just did a bond issuance in November, and that total was $517 million. We will do the final bond issuance for I-70 in fiscal year 28 in the amount of $493 million. In fiscal year 2027, we will do a bond issuance for the I-44 project, and that is $364 million. In addition to that, we have 4 planned issuances of Amendment 3, $654 million in 26, $580 million in 28, $508 million in 2030, and $465 million in 2032. I want to talk just a little bit more about that. So the State Road Bond Fund revenue was phased in from fiscal years 2006 and 2009 in accordance with the Constitution as a result of the passage of Amendment 3. The funding source was motor vehicle sales tax that was previously deposited into general revenue that was redirected into a newly created fund, the State Road Bond Fund. During the phase-in period, the only use of those funds in the State Road Bond Fund was to pay debt service. The intent has always been to use those monies to pay debt service. The Constitution does lay out, if there is no debt service that require the funds, a certification process between the Office of Administration Commissioner and the Commission can occur to transfer the funds from the State Road Bond Fund into the State Road Fund. An appropriation would also be required, and that certification process and the obtaining of that appropriation could be risky. The Commission's debt management policy outlines this process and has an emphasis paragraph to remind the Commission to ensure that no bonding is needed. So this graph shows that this forecast proposes Amendment 3 bond issuance in amounts to ensure that the debt service paid matches the revenue coming in. So as the motor vehicle sales tax has grown, we originally had a plan to do issuances every 3 years at $500 million. Well, as that motor vehicle sales tax has grown, the balance of the State Road Bond Fund has come up. We've looked at that and made planned issuances to use all that revenue so there isn't money sitting idle.
Now, I want to stop and understand something on that a little better. So we're talking about 2 different bonding programs, the I-70 bonding and subsequently the I-44, of which the debt service is handled by general revenue.
That is
And then we're
correct.
talking about the Amendment 3 bonding, which uses State Road Fund remittances to do debt service.
It actually uses the State Road Bond Fund revenue to pay debt service.
And where does the State Road Bond Fund get its revenue from?
From motor vehicle sales tax.
It's motor vehicle sales.
It was a portion of the motor vehicle sales tax that was previously deposited into general revenue that when the passage of Amendment 3 occurred in November of 2004, it redirected that money
Okay.
into the State Road Bond Fund.
So the risk would occur in the event the funds weren't needed, but we're planning to need them. But in the event we didn't need them, it would require appropriation to avoid remitting back to the state.
Well, it would require 2 things. There's a certification process with the Office of Administration Commissioner and would also require transfer appropriation from the State Road Bond Fund into the State Road Fund. Those monies couldn't be remitted back to the state. They could only be remitted into the State Road Fund because it is a highway user fee.
Okay.
So back before Amendment 3, half of the sales tax on automobiles went to MoDOT and half went to the general fund. And so what Amendment 3 did is it said, we're going to take all of that, half of it comes to us, basically half comes to us as state road fund, and then the other half is in this road bond fund. And I think, I don't foresee any situation where that funding will not be needed for road and bridge construction across the state. And so the way that this is laid out, and you may ask the question, well, why are you doing it in 28, 30, 32? It is to spend down the revenue that comes into that fund, but it's also strategic in how we develop our STIP to make sure we have kind of a steady, it kind of fills in some of the valleys with our other funding sources. And so when we develop the STIP, we can kind of have a constant, level of funding. And so that our industry can count on that more constant level of funding instead of doing this up and down, which is not good for planning or for development or for construction. So there's kind of a few things behind it. One being making sure we spend down the money in the fund, but also to make sure we have a consistent and reliable program going forward.
So one last question. In the event that we didn't need all of it and it was in this state road bond fund, does anything limit us from having a larger bonding issuance to do other things?
The commission's policy sets the parameters on how much of the revenue can be used for bond or to pay debt service.
So that would be the limiting factor.
That is the limiting factor.
Got it.
And it would have to be for road and bridge,
Right.
state road and bridge.
Correct.
That's an important detail. Thanks for sharing that.
This graph shows the picture for all resources available for state revenues, federal revenue, and Amendment 3 bond proceed. This graph does not include one-time funding made available by the Governor and General Assembly, like the funds for the Improve I-70 program, the Ford 44 effort for the General Assembly designated and funded projects. This year's forecast has $45.9 million more in resources available than the previous year's forecast, and that's due to the timing of contractor payments and their impact on federal reimbursement. Now with that, I'm going to turn it over to Doug to talk about disbursements.
Thank you, Brenda. Good afternoon, everyone. So Brenda got to talk about the money flowing into the department. I'm going to talk about the disbursements, so the money flowing out of the department. This first chart really just shows the state road fund. It's our base forecast, as Brenda's been talking about. It does not include the Improve I-70 program, the Ford 44 effort, or any of the General Assembly and designated projects, which I'll cover those in a little bit. The red line, as Brenda talked about, covers our revenues. The blue line, Let me get to that. Sorry. The blue line covers the disbursements. So I'm going to get into some details on that. And then the green line represents our state road fund in cash balance at the end of each fiscal year. And as Brenda mentioned earlier, our assumptions start with the approved FY26 budget, and then it's adjusted for any items that we have in FY27 appropriation request, which was approved by the commission in August. Again, I'll mention attachment 1, page 3 has a lot of those spending assumptions in them and provides some really good detailed information. Overall, our total disbursements averaged $3.8 billion a year from 2027 to 2031. And our disbursements are comprised of 3 real components. We've got our operating budget, our program delivery expenditures, and our spending by other state agencies. And I'll cover each one of these in a little more detail. So we'll start with the operating budget, which represents 28% of our spending and includes our personal services, which is our wages and salaries for employees, the corresponding fringe benefits for those, and then our expense and equipment. And again, those one-time items that were included in the FY27 appropriate request, which includes a 2% market adjustment for all employees and increases to move employees through the salary ranges based on tenure. We've also included the additional staff of 100 maintenance employees in our safety and operations to meet customer expectations. And for this year's forecast, we started in 2028 with an annual cost of living adjustment of 2%. We do realize that the annual cost of living adjustments have to come back to the commission annually for approval, and then also by the General Assembly. But we wanted to make sure we put something in a forecast to account for that and have a placeholder over that 5-year period. Now, I mentioned when it comes to personal services, we also have the corresponding fringe benefits. So for this forecast, our fringe benefits are 72 cents for every dollar of PS that we spend. This is a little bit down from last year. Last year was at 75 cents for every dollar. And those fringe benefits include our retirement contributions, medical contributions, workers' comp, Social Security, and unemployment. We do see the biggest savings in our retirement contributions. We're going from 37% contribution rate in 2026 to 33% in 2027. If you remember, in 2025 it was at 52%, so we continue to see a decline in that, which is great news. That equates to savings of about $9 million a year in our forecast. We've also included an additional $1.9 million annually for increases in medical and life benefits for retirees. And then starting in 2028, we use an annual growth rate of 9% for medical benefits. Last year, we had a growth rate of 8%. So the final component of our operating budget is our expense and equipment, otherwise known as E&E. You'll hear us say that a lot, which is our materials and supplies. And for this forecast, it includes the increase we requested in FY27 of $1.4 million for asphalt and concrete pavement repairs on our roadways, $1.5 million for support tasks for the World Cup, and then $3 million for inflationary costs with fleet. Overall, that's a total increase of $5.9 million or 1.4% for FY27. Starting in 2028, we do have an annual growth rate of 2.5% to account for inflation, which is about $11.2 million per year. So I know Todd brought this up last year during his presentation. Our E&E budget has grown over the last several years, which is really good news because historically it had been flat. And over the last 4 years, our annual growth rate is 5.9% or $21.9 million. So good news on that front. Now I'll talk a little bit about our program delivery expenditures, which represent 60% of our total spending. Program and delivery includes those items like our contractor payments, local public agency program, which Brenda mentioned earlier, design bridge consultant engineering, right-of-way acquisitions, utilities, and other payments, and then our debt service program. For contractor payment, this includes payments to contractors for work we currently have going on. So there are progress payments that we have for our existing construction projects. Could be projects that were awarded this year, awarded last year, awarded several years ago. As you know, some projects may pay out a little quicker than others, or resurfacing jobs typically can pay out in one construction season. But our larger major reconstruction projects or bridge projects usually pay out over several years. Our contractor payments are based off of contractor awards of $1.46 billion annually. This is just a little bit more than last year's forecast, which was $1.41 billion. Again, this does not include the Improve I-70 program, Forward 44 effort, or the General Assembly and designated projects. I mentioned part of program delivery is a local public agency program. These are federal suballocated dollars that pass through MoDOT to cities and counties for improvements that they would do on city streets, county bridge replacement projects, pedestrian facilities, air quality projects in the Kansas City, St. Louis urban areas. And MoDOT is actually responsible for administering the programs, but our local agencies are the ones that actually let and deliver the projects. They submit invoices to MoDOT for reimbursement, and in turn, we submit invoices to Federal Highway for reimbursement. So really just act as a pass-through agency, but we have to count for those expenditures in our forecast. Program delivery includes our design bridge consultant engineering. This is payments to engineering firms for roadway and bridge plans. We've included $110 million annually for that, which is the same as last year's forecast. Right-of-way acquisitions are payments to property owners to secure right-of-way for construction projects. We've included $30 million annually for that, which is the same as last year's forecast. And then we have utilities and other payments. Other payments really encompass like our transportation management centers and motorist assist operation programs. And we've included $5.1 million annually for those programs. Now, Brenda mentioned our bonding program. So our debt service payments are included in this as well for our borrowed funds. And it does include, which Brenda talked about, the repayments of the proposed Amendment 3 bond issuances in 26, 28, 30, and 32, as she discussed earlier. The final component of our disbursements is the spending by other state agencies. And that represents the remaining 12%. So majority of this, around 93%, is from the Highway Patrol for enforcing the roadway laws. And the remainder of it is by the Missouri Department of Revenue. Based off historical data, we've included an annual growth rate in those expenditures of 5.7%. So overall, our total disbursements over the 5-year period from 2027 to 2031 is $151.2 million more compared to last year's forecast. Brenda talked a little bit about this. We do want to maximize the investment level, so we do rely on deficit spending through our forecast as well. Our state road fund balance is expected to decline from about $1.6 billion in 2026 to $687 million in 2032, and that's the green line that you see on the graph. And keep in mind that 2032 does include that revenue bond proceeds of $465 million on the Amendment 3. Our deficit spending averages $117 million per year. And we do this while also maintaining an adequate cash balance to respond for any fluctuations that we would see in our receipts and our disbursements, and for any unanticipated expenditures, any natural disasters that we would come our way. So this next chart shows the revenue and disbursements for the Improve I-70 program, the Forward 44 effort, and the General Assembly designated and funded projects. So for the Improve I-70 program, we've included $1.2 billion of general revenue and $1 billion in bond proceeds for contractor payments, with $136 million of general revenue for our annual debt service payments on those bonds. For the Forward 44 effort, we've included $201 million of general revenue, $364 million of bond proceeds for contractor payments, and $44 million of general revenue for our annual debt service payments for the Forward 44 effort. We also have general revenue included for our General Assembly and designated projects for the low volume roads program, US 67 in Butler County, I-70 interchange in Warren County, US 65 from Buffalo to Warsaw, and various other routes that's been included in there. So we wanted to point that out. This graph shows our comparison of contract awards between the two forecasts, from 2027's forecast to the 2026 forecast. And this is everything. So it includes the State Road Fund, Improve I-70, Forward 44 effort, General Assembly, and a designated funded project. So it's all in. The overall contractor awards are $9.3 billion over that 5-year period, 2027 to 2031, and are 34 million more than last year's forecast. We're averaging about $1.9 billion a year in awards, which is absolutely incredible. Final chart I have really kind of talks about the contractor payments. So the previous one is the awards, and keep in mind that's at the beginning of the project. That's what's included in the STIP. For the forecast, we identify when we think those outflows of cash will happen based off the awards. And this is really just showing a comparison between last year's forecast and this year's forecast on what those contractor payments would look like. So with that, I will turn it back over to Brenda.
And before we move on, do you have any questions on the disbursement side?
Any questions?
All right.
I think these last two charts that Doug showed you on contractor payments kind of is part of the story that everybody needs to be aware of as we look 3 and 4 years in the future, because the impact of the legislatively designated projects has been huge. There is no doubt, between low volume minor roads, I-70, I-44, and various other things. It's brought projects to the state that MoDOT would not have been able to do under our normal, funding scenario. But it's also created kind of a expectation that I'm not sure that people understand, that it's not going to continue, both in our industry, in our MoDOT work, that our group, and then with the public. So this is kind of important. When you're at the beginning of it and everything was going up, everybody was pretty jazzed about it. But now we've kind of, if you look at these, you kind of reached the peak. And now we're going to go back to what I would call our routine funding. And as we've talked many times before, of those funding sources, 2 of them are declining, and 2 of them probably maybe barely keep up with inflation. So in addition to the reduction due to the loss of designated revenue from General Assembly, we now can also see the impact of what inflation is going to do to our ability to deliver not only projects, but also our internal operating budget, because they all are coming from the same bucket. So just these graphs kind of tell a story that maybe people aren't quite as aware of as they should be.
Thank you, Ed. I'm glad you brought that up because as you and I have discussed, not only are we going to have to lower expectations, but the thing that troubles me a great deal is our contracting community has built up a very substantial capacity, a skilled workforce, and a capacity to deliver the surge in spending. And as that graph starts to go down, that skilled workforce that has been so critical to rebuild is going to have less work to do. And as you know, I've said I'd like to have some policy discussion about that, because what a shame it would be to build up our in-state contractor capacity and skilled workforce only to watch it go away. And the other thing that you point out that troubles me is the effect of inflation on two fixed and declining revenue streams. It's easy to understand how when you have fixed and declining revenue streams and inflation marches forward, you're really devaluing the purchasing power of the dollar and you're able to buy less. I think that's a big concern of this commission going forward as well, as you've articulated. Just curiosity, if you were to apply a most standard cost of living index, an inflation index, what might, if that were applied to fuel tax receipts from the prior year, how much money might that be? Round numbers.
Well, CPI is usually around somewhere between 2 and 3%.
Uh-huh.
So it would be 2 or 3% more.
Yeah. On as big as the base is, it's a lot of money.
It is.
It's a lot of money. So, okay. Other questions on the disbursement side? If not,
Right. So taking just a little bit different look, this pie chart shows where all the funding included in this forecast comes from. By far, the largest amount is federal funds at 36%. Of the three primary state revenue sources, motor fuel tax provides the most at 20%. You can see that huge investment of other state resources with the bright yellow slice at 14%. This distribution is very similar to the distribution last year. Here is a pie chart that shows the distribution of disbursements. The largest portion is for the construction program at 42%. The next largest category is the operating budget, which includes all the state road fund, personal service, fringe benefits, expense, and equipment. This is our investment in the customer service we provide Missourians. Again, you can see that yellow wedge at 16%. For the Improve I-70 program, the Forward 44 effort, and the General Assembly designated and funded projects. Some of the highway user fees are appropriated, as Doug talked about, to two other state agencies, Department of Revenue and Missouri State Highway Patrol. In accordance with the Constitution, that is 10% of disbursements. And lastly, debt service is 7%. And again, this distribution of disbursements is very similar to what we saw last year. And that concludes the prepared materials that we have for you today, and we'd be glad to answer any questions you have.
well, great job as always. Very helpful. It's good that we review this occasionally just to keep it top of mind. I know that we have the Amendment 3 bond issuance coming up, I believe, for consideration in April.
Correct.
Yeah.
That is correct.
In April. Will we have any, as we prepare to consider that Amendment 3 bond issuance, will there be another snapshot to talk about these trends closer to the actual date of decision on those bonds?
We are constantly monitoring what is going on, and we'd be glad to provide an update to the commission as we get closer to that bond issuance.
Okay. The reason, financial forecasts are just forecasts, and real events can take place, but I feel you've been responsible with your forecast. I do note that there are a lot of general revenue assumptions in this forecast. I'm just going through the list of general revenue assumptions, and I wasn't able to do the math in my head, but when you total them all up, it's a pretty significant portion. We know we're about to enter a new legislative session. We're led to believe that general revenues are going to be pretty tight, and any one of these could have an impact on this forecast if the state's general revenue position were to deteriorate. So it would seem like a good idea to maybe take another look at this closer to the time we consider that Amendment 3 issuance. Maybe not full blown, but some snapshot closer to that time.
We would be glad to do that. I think we have planned a mini workshop on that issuance in March, so that's only 2 months away. But certainly we will continue to monitor the revenue situation and brief the commission if anything changes.
Okay, then I just have a couple specific questions and then defer to others who may have some. The forecast includes 57 million from the Budget Stabilization Fund to the Governor's Cost Share Fund. I'm assuming that is to cover prior commitments from the Governor's Cost Share.
That is correct. Budget Stabilization Fund is a general revenue lookalike, and that is the monies that were appropriated previously.
So to your knowledge, currently, is the Governor's Cost Share Plan fully obligated?
Yes.
As
it is.
such, it doesn't have a balance that we might,
No, it does not.
it's basically empty.
Correct. It is already obligated on projects.
Yeah,
Projects
so-
have been selected and picked, and they're just in the process of being delivered.
Assuming the appropriations process honors these obligations, when we're done, Governor's Cost Share is empty.
That is correct.
Yeah, the commission has talked about and taken the position that is one of the programs that we think is very useful, and I'm hopeful that the state might find a way to recapitalize that cost share program because it's been tremendously, it addresses things that are timely that aren't able to get into the STIP process. And believe it or not, there are projects that come up that we couldn't contemplate in the STIP process. And therefore the cost share program, I think, is one of the best programs we have. Yeah. So I'm an advocate for funding the Governor's Cost Share Program because I think it's such a magnificent way to meet unanticipated opportunities. I think there was in the materials here an estimate of some years out when we would run into deficit spending, having built up some balances. Can you provide a little more color about that?
Well, every year, the amount we're spending is greater than the revenues we are bringing in. I think that's 117 million on average per year. But this forecast does not show that the state road fund and the corresponding highway user funds will run into deficit.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for clarifying that.
Yeah.
I think those are mine. Let me go around the table here. Yeah.
Before we move on the, on the road fund balance, I think it's important to note, people see that road fund balance of 1.5 billion or whatever it is, and they say, oh my gosh, there is free money, right? Let's go do something. But we got to remember the commitments we have already against that,
Right.
in contracts that have already been signed that exceeds 2 point something billion. I don't know the number today. And this is a targeted effort, though, that we will spend down that balance to where we think we're comfortable.
Mhm.
And what Doug told you about we got to honor the commitments we've made with current contracts. We've got to have enough capacity to do cash flow because we flow a lot of cash in any given month. You know, some days we're spending $1 million a day routinely in the summer. And then I think one thing that we kind of have been looking at is this year we had a lot of natural disasters. None of them were like, you know, widespread across the entire state, but certainly we have to be able to respond to those, whether it be tornado or flood or earthquake or whatever happens. And we're starting to see some maybe inconsistency in the reimbursement from the federal government on that. And some of the things that have been kind of said would lead you to believe that maybe that's not going to be as forthcoming in the future. We don't know that, but I think, you know, that's part of what also having at least some balance in the road fund. You know, major bridge disaster like what happened in Baltimore would take every bit of our balance in the road fund to fix. So we can't like discount that and say, well, let's just spend it to zero, because we can't do that.
Well, one of the strengths of our approach is that when we put something in the 5-year capital plan, the STIP, communities know we're going to do it, and we can't yank the rug out. So I think that's on point. Vice Chairman? Good. Commissioner Hagerman? Francis? Henry?
Just a very basic question, if I could ask this. On the Senate Bill,
Thank you, Commissioner. On the Senate Bill 262 refunds, you mentioned the variability of those. Could you just help me understand that a bit better with more explanation there on that variability?
Certainly. So part of the implementation of Senate Bill 262 allows the citizens of Missouri to apply for a refund. So it has to be an action of the taxpayer to apply for a refund. And when we implemented this, we didn't know how many citizens would apply for that refund. We've had a range from as little as 0.37% of the revenue collected that needed to be refunded. The highest was 0.77% over that time. It's averaged out to about 0.5% of the revenue that people apply for and get a refund. There are requirements to save receipts and save information to be able to apply for that refund.
But it just varies based on the public.
It varies based upon who applies for a refund. That is correct.
Thank you.
And Commissioner, I think, you know, when we were first contemplating this bill, we had kind of thought about as much as 20% might be what would be asked for in refunds. And as it turned out, it's been relatively small. It's as the cent per gallon went up, we kind of saw more people asking for a refund, because when it was 2.5 cents, you know, it would be, you might get $20. When it goes to 12.5, it might be worth your time to do that. And so we don't really know where that's going to bottom out, but it seems like it's fairly consistent, I guess. At least it's consistent at a low enough number, because we were kind of banking on something much higher. So we're really pretty happy about that.
I would guess most of it's in the diesel tax, right? For trucks?
No, it has to be in the motor fuel.
In
It
the
has to be
regular
in the
motor
gas. Mhm. It has to be in gas.
Anything over 24,000 pounds cannot apply. So if you're driving an over the road truck or a straight truck, you can't. It's only for citizens motor vehicle.
Okay,
Retail consumers.
good. Okay, doesn't look like anybody else has any questions. Do you have any closing thoughts or comments, Ed?
I think I already injected mine. I think we went.
Okay. All right. Well, Brendan, Doug, once again, thank you for an outstanding snapshot of where we stand financially. I know between now and April, we'll be thinking about that bond issuance and the economic circumstance that exists at the time we have to make that decision. But this gives us a good snapshot today to kind of think as we go forward towards April. With that, I don't know of any other business to come before the workshop. We will reconvene tomorrow at 9 o'clock for our regular open session. For those listening in via the internet, we invite you to rejoin us at 9 o'clock tomorrow, at which time we'll have the normal commission open meeting. Unless there is any other business to come before us, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Got a motion and a second from Commissioner Boatright, Commissioner Hegeman. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it. We stand adjourned.